Exalted is unusual as far as fantasy games go. Most fantasy games stay rooted in the principles set forth by a certain game involving bastions and basilisks. You know the sort of things I'm talking about. Strictly defined classes and roles, metaphysical plateaus with sudden increases in power, and excruciatingly detailed rules on how to make things dead, with vague hand-waving and improvisation for everything else. Exalted says forget all that. Open-ended interpretations of class rules, gradual and granular improvements, and subsystems galore to gamify things that aren't normally gamified. And unfortunately, not all of it works out that well or is even remotely enjoyable. I'm looking at you, Combat. But nonetheless, Exalted tries. One of the things that I find most fascinating about Exalted is the different character types there are. The core book covers the Solar Exalted, the most powerful, especially with regards to everything the core book introduces. Even though the Solars are the most powerful, it's kind of like they're the protagonist in a JRPG video game. They're technically capable in all kinds of things besides what they specialize in. Though, you'll still get other party members who can do other things way better than the hero, even if they're not as good in terms of raw power. So, with that in mind, we'll be talking today about Lunars, the shape-shifting reflections of the Solar Exalted. Let's start with the key differences between Lunars and Solars. Lunars are all about shape-shifting. They have a spirit form and are expected to have all kinds of mutations. In fact, this book adds more mutation merits, just in case you need even more bizarre inhuman abilities. Whereas Solars are all about excelling in one particular field, Lunars, by contrast, are more adaptive. That is, a Solar can easily invest most of their starting charms in their supernal ability, since they have 5 essence for the sake of learning charms in that ability. Lunars gain no such benefit, forcing them to spread out. This does work to their advantage though, since many of their charms intertwine in their effects, even if they're from different attribute cascades. For example, when I was thumbing through some of the charms, I was making a character that favored intelligence and stamina. These two had some surprising synergies. Intelligence had a method of curing disease by allowing the Lunar to absorb that into themselves. Meanwhile, Stamina had numerous charms for resisting disease, as well as charms for allowing them to become a vector to spread that disease later. And to take things even further, there's a lot of other intelligence charms that make other intelligence abilities more effective if you introduce or challenge facts via lore, including treating disease. Lunars also have 2 new tags introduced for their charms, Protean and Archetype. Protean is the simpler of the two. They're more powerful if you're in an animal form. Archetype is what makes their cascades nightmarish though. This tag provides an alternate prerequisite depending on what form the Lunar takes. For example, if their spirit form is venomous or poisonous, then it's easier for them to gain poison resistance and even weaponizing poison using their charms. By contrast, Solars get a piddly 3 charms for resisting poison and disease, although they're extremely effective. If Solar wants to poison somebody though, their methods are typically those that would be available to an ordinary human. Lunars, as I mentioned earlier, are instead able to generate those poisons in themselves under the right conditions. And that's the gist of how the two are different. Solars are the best that a human can be, whereas Lunars are forces of nature. For my world literature buffs out there, if Gilgamesh is a Solar, Enkidu would be a Lunar. Character creation in Exalted will pretty much always follow the same general steps no matter what you're playing. So, for the sake of brevity, I'm only going to cover the major differences here. First, castes. There are 3 castes for Lunars, 4 if you count the casteless. Full Moon caste is the warriors and hunters that favor physical attributes. Changing Moon is the tricksters that favor social attributes. No Moon is the sages and storytellers that favor mental attributes. And the casteless, since they technically are not a caste, favor no attributes. Your caste gives you a few special abilities and also determines your caste attributes, with the casteless having no caste attributes since they are not a caste. Second, your character has a spirit shape and a tell. Spirit shape is what creature the Exalt identifies most as, either physically or in some other way, such as being as strong as an ox or being ride or die for your pack, like a good doggo. Meanwhile, tell is a particular quirk your character has that always appears or happens no matter what form they're in. It could be something like always having rings around your eyes like you're a raccoon, or that any single syllable sound that they make has reverb. When you're prioritizing and assigning your attributes, keep in mind, Lunars do get more attribute points than Solars. That is not a typo. You're also not restricted to merits in the Lunar book either. In fact, many of the Lunar book merits are available to other characters as well, and may even have prerequisites from the core book. Picking charms is the toughest part of any character in Exalted, regardless of which type you're playing. And the special rules that apply to Lunars make their charms more challenging in its own right, which I mentioned earlier, Protean and Archetype. The last thing worth noting is that the essence pools of Lunars are slightly different from that of the Solars, so don't be alarmed if you're in a mixed Exalt game and don't have the same essence pools. With character creation out of the way, there's a few other things from the Lunar book I want to talk about. First, the Excellency. Every Exalt of every type has some form of these, and they all function differently. For Lunars, your Excellency is tied to the attribute, making it by far the most flexible. It allows you to add an extra die for each mote that you spend up to the relevant attribute being used. Though, if this feels insufficient, you can increase this cap with a stunt, a description of how you're using some other attribute to assist in the task. So, one could break open a steel lockbox using strength, and by examining it for weak points most susceptible to breakage, you could also increase your dice limit of your Excellency using your perception. There's two ways to gain Excellencies, depending on if it's a cased or favorite attribute or not. Cased and favorite attributes gain an Excellency if they're rated at 3, or if you know at least one charm for that attribute. But if it's for a non-cased, non-favorite attribute, these numbers go up to being rated at 5, or knowing 2 charms. As with Solars, these are the rawest form of their power, with charms typically being more efficient or allowing some edge you wouldn't otherwise get. Lunars are shapeshifters, and as time goes on, they can acquire new forms to go into. The most basic way of accomplishing this is via the Sacred Hunt. A Lunar must declare their intent to hunt a critter, kill it, eat their heart, and then they can wear its skin. Though, there are plenty of charms that allow for additional method of gaining new forms. And while everything in the Lunar book is designed with Lunars in mind, or follows the Lunar theme of mutability, there's still plenty of things that other Exalts can benefit from as well. And this is the modus operandi that I kind of like about Exalted. Every book fits within the theme of who it was meant for, but it includes things that anybody can benefit from. Especially Solars, since they're featured in the core book, which you technically need to even play Exalted. These things are, of course, martial arts, sorcery, and artifacts. Many of the martial arts in this book benefit from having other abilities, and the new spells available for sorcerers only go up to the Celestial Circle, since that's the highest that Lunars can learn. And all the artifacts are, of course, made of moonsilver, the magical material favored by Lunars. The Solar Exalted are the peak of humanity and the builders of society. And just as the moon's light is a reflection of that from the sun, the Lunars are the peak of nature, and at most home in nature or other parts of the world where civilized people wouldn't dare go. Mechanically speaking though, Solars are very straightforward. Their charms do one thing, and they do it very well. Contrast to Lunars, whose charms can be used for a wide variety of situations, and even have a fair amount of crossover. Plus, shapeshifting. Lunars are shapeshifters, so if you don't got a charm, spell, or some other special power that solves a problem, you can always just turn into something else and solve your problems in a more mundane way. Lunars are all about mutability and options. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, give me a thumbs up like. And if you want to hear more about Exalted or any other wildly complex RPG, check out my other videos or hit the subscribe button. And while you're at it, if you're already familiar with Lunar charms, tell us about some of your favorites in the comments section. And with all that said, I am Aron der Schädel, and I will see you all next time.